Hi, Monique here. If you like this kind of information, consider joining my Patreon group. You have level 1, where you get lots of written posts, tips and tricks, supplement information. Level 2 will get you a 2 or 3 day menu plan so that you can eat low oxalate and do it with confidence. And level 3 will get you the whole live Patreon Zoom, where you get to participate and ask questions. So enjoy the video and check me out on Patreon.
Monique Attinger, welcome back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks for having me again, Casey. It's always fun when we get a chance to have a chat.
Totally agree. Such a joy to host you. I don't know how this is happening, but every time I invite you back, you're getting younger and younger and younger and younger. You have some guns.
Oh, I was showing them off to you. Okay, I'll do it again. Yep.
Yes.
Like you see the actual, there's some really actual muscle definition going on there. Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty pleased. This carnivore thing works. Yeah.
It's so awesome. I mean, I've been 4.5 years on it now. I know you've kind of transitioned over time. And for the one thing, I mean, it's just like convenient. It's easy to do. Once you're on it, you can maintain it really well. I just ate 10 eggs. I feel awesome. Like, it's great. I did my strength training this morning as well. And, you know, after a while, again, it's convenient. It's easy. It's not very expensive. You just feel so good. It's not worth getting off of things. It's like you commented off air when you said like cake every now and again, but even then it's like not even that worth it.
Yeah, honestly, there's the odd thing where I will go and make it in sort of a ketogenic or sometimes in a, sort of carnivore-ish way, because it's mostly a dessert, for instance, mostly based on eggs or dairy or whatever. But truly, I'm finding that I just feel a lot better if I don't stray too far, other than my occasional cup of coffee and now my Super Mom Nutritional Facts mug.
I love the mug. Nice.
Yeah, one of my kids got it for me for my birthday, which was in September when I turned, and I'm going to admit my age on air because I hope it's a good news story for others. I am 63. So
yay.
Yeah, it's like my husband actually said the same thing to me. He said, quit aging in reverse. And it's really interesting if you get your diet right. So for me, the aging in reverse started with lowering oxalate, but it's improving over time. And the reason I know that is because when I was 50, I had a 5-year-old I was taking to kindergarten. And I remember her first week or so in kindergarten, she was kind of getting used to it. I was getting used to it. And we arrived at school one day and she was kind of giving me the gears. And she might be a little bit like her mother. She might be a little stubborn. She might have opinions. And so she was giving me a little bit of that. And so she and I were chatting back and forth, and I was trying to get her out of the car. And all of a sudden I hear from over my shoulder back someplace, listen to your grandmother. And I'm thinking, there's lots of cars there. People are getting their kids out and stuff. I'm thinking somebody's talking to somebody else. And then Raina says something else snooty. And I said, come on, sweetie, you can do better than that. And I hear again, no, you should listen to your grandmother. And I'm thinking, oh. And it was so hilarious because there's my kid. I don't know if she was 5 yet, but she was close to 5. Rears up, puts her hands on her hips and says, that's not my grandma, that's my mama. And I'm like, oh gosh, they are talking to me.
Mortifying.
Mortified. Now, none of her friends believe that I'm in my 60s. They go, well, my parents look older than your mom. And so diet matters. We aren't a car. It's not fuel. What you eat are your replacement parts. So those are your materials for your replacement part. Would you buy second grade lumber to build your home? No. Do you want second grade steel for your car? No. Do you want second grade parts for your body? Right? And so I've started to do a bit more talking about this idea of us as independently mobile manufacturing facilities, right? So we are doing a lot more with what we eat than just burning it off. So the only thing in your diet, which is really, I'll say, fuel, would be carbs. And for a lot of us, those are not our friends. They're certainly not my friend. For way too long, when I was young, I was basically fed that SAD diet. And I'm highly suspicious that I was insulin resistant when I was in my teens. Like I didn't have to wait till get older. But then you've set up those eating patterns. It took me decades to unwind some of them. And if you add something like oxalate in there as a toxin, not just that you're not getting quality materials, like most of your body's not built with carbs. There might be a small percentage that has some percentage of carbs in there, but basically what you're looking at is protein and fats, and
That's right.
and minerals as a added structure for the bones and stuff. That's really what you're built out of. And so focusing on a lot of carbs, how much fuel do you need, right? And when you eat something that's protein, you can use that as fuel too. So
right.
You're not limited in what your body can do with it. With carbs, your body has one thing it can do with it and one thing only. Yes, over the past, say 5-6 years, even my husband has complained that I'm aging in reverse. So I'll just keep at it because
That's great.
to have that, run around with the grandbabies and so on. And I don't have any yet, so I have to stay.
That's amazing. Yeah, you mentioned the carbohydrates that we use, and we can only store such a tiny limited amount of them unless you're super active all the time. There's just no chance, which is why people keep adding on and adding on and adding on all this fuel. They're taking on way too much. And I love the analogy of the car. I think that was fantastic. At the time of this recording, Thanksgiving's coming up in 2 weeks. I'm kind of dreading it. I don't know if you've seen the meme on Twitter that's gone around a little bit that shows it's like carnivore bros and he's eating carnivore and he's flexing, and then the next screen he's like, "Oh, I ate a carbohydrate, my back hurt," which is making fun of us. And I think it's funny, and it's partially true. Last Thanksgiving, I had sweet potatoes with my dinner. My tooth hurt for a day and a half. I'm thinking, like, if I have the pie, I'm going to have anxiety and I'm not going to sleep. If I have the potatoes, my tooth's going to hurt. Like, I think I'm going to just continue sticking to carnivore. It's pretty easy.
Yeah. And I'd have to agree with you that I do better when I stick to it. And I also do better if I'm going to deviate in any way from a carnivore diet, then I will go to a low carb, but also low oxalate. So if I have something higher in oxalate, like sweet potatoes higher in oxalate, so we might as well give people for Thanksgiving a bit of a heads up, and for Christmas and other times when we might use these, special dishes with sweet potato or even regular potato. There's a lot of oxalate in those too. If your favorite thing is green smoothies, as we discussed before, and you're throwing handfuls of spinach in, you are getting such a high amount of oxalate. And I've had this discussion with other people who were really trying to eat extra healthy and doing a lot of oxalate. And lots of people are doing things like throwing cacao and spinach and almond and chia all in one blender. Like, there is so much oxalate in that result. I wouldn't even want to walk past the blender. Like, that would just give me the creeps. That's like my idea of an oxalate related horror movie. So, we're not doing ourselves any favor with that stuff. And so you combine sugar plus oxalate, and you've got the oxidative sugar and you've got the oxidative oxalate, and away you go. You're off to the races.
Yeah, it's such a mess. Okay, well, obviously our topic is going to be around oxalate. We've talked about this before. I still just think, like, when I'm really trying to think about this or explain it to somebody, I feel absolutely insane about this whole thing. And so when I'm hosting my podcast, I don't really push back on my guests too much. Like, I'm not Joe Rogan. I want to hear everybody's opinions, and I can't live other people's lives. And so I appreciate that. And we had recently somebody on who was talking about diet and cancer, and she was saying, basically, we need to stop demonizing certain foods, especially, carnivores demonizing certain plant foods. She mentioned oxalate and kind of said that it was like a little bit overblown. We kind of came to the agreement that, like, the big thing that all of us can agree on is ultra processed foods are absolutely terrible. And, I'm like nodding along and agreeing. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fair. What would you have done in that situation? Should I have pushed back a little bit harder to say, like, well, this is a bigger problem than we think? Like, how would you have handled that?
I think it's very difficult because there's not quite the level of research yet for some people to be convinced, I'd say. But what I would probably say in that situation is that anything that's highly inflammatory or pro-oxidative, we should be able to agree that that's something you don't want extra of in your diet. And I would also argue that at the same time that you don't want to demonize necessarily food groups. And my family are happy omnivores. I feed them like omnivores. They don't have the degree of insulin resistance. They don't have decades of weight problems behind them. So I don't in any way try to influence them to be carnivore. I just say, eat to be healthy. Leave the oxalate off. Don't overdo the sugar, right? Like those things are kind of basics. But I think what we do is we also confer sainthood on foods that don't deserve it. I'm not trying to demonize a food per se. Although there's certain things I honestly would not touch. I would not touch chia. I would not touch like spinach unless if there's a few leaves in a salad, which I happen to be having, I am not going to worry about that. But there are things I would never eat again. Rhubarb. Rhubarb is one of the highest oxalate things we eat and still call food. Chia is up there too. And another one that's currently experiencing all kinds of great press for its benefits is chaga mushroom. This one's actually in my sites because chaga mushroom in 100 grams can have an eye-watering 20,000 milligrams of oxalate.
What?
I mean, I kid you not. The research shows it can be as high as 20,000 milligrams. That means 1/5 of that food is oxalate. It's not food. It's not food anymore. To me, I would take that right off the list of things that you would eat. So, sometimes in our desire to look at the positive benefits of a food, so people will talk about how great spinach is for you. It's high in iron. It's high in calcium. We're deifying this thing and just ignoring any problems with it. Not even just oxalate, phytates, there's other stuff in there, right? I mean, we do that in so many places where we want to turn a food into like almost a sacrament. It's so good for us, right? And so what I'd say is neither one of these things are accurate. But the truth is, we don't eat every food out there. Why not? They're not all good for us, right? And what if some of the things that have become part of the human food supply are not as good for us as we think? So it's not like I keep running into people who are talking about this demonization of food. This just seems to be one of those places where human beings have decided to polarize. Things are extra good for us or extra bad for us. That's not the point. I'm going to say there's a third way through here, which is we don't do a cost benefit on food. We don't look at a food and go, here's its pluses, here's its minuses, and then say, okay, based on that, do I want to eat it or don't I? And oxalate's not anywhere on that kind of evaluation. And it should be because it's a stressor to your system. It chelates minerals. We already know most human beings in North America are low in minerals. Why would you want a mineral chelator that's going to reduce those even further? It doesn't make any sense, right? We know that it's pro-inflammatory. There's research now which shows it turns on the inflammasome. Well, who wants inflammation to be driven in a way where it's not part of a healing process? We don't want to drive inflammation just for fun. Our body should be doing that only as a response to the appropriate kind of situation. Oxalate's not that, right? We're driving sterile, chronic inflammation with things that are pro-inflammatory. That's not what we want to do. And the other thing is, it's a toxin. We know it's a mitochondrial toxin. So that means your cells are not going to function as efficiently as they should. They're not going to be able to generate the amount of energy that they should. Well, that doesn't seem positive either, right? But perhaps worse than other things that turn up in our food, let's say phytates or lectins or other things like that. It's not clear to me that those suckers bioaccumulate, but oxalate bioaccumulates. And we know that from the hyperoxaluria literature, which looks at people who have genetic hyperoxaluria. Okay, you don't have to have genetic hyperoxaluria for it to be bioaccumulating. It's doing the same thing to you if it comes from your diet as if it comes from your metabolism. If you got enough of it, it bioaccumulates. And so there's research now in areas like arthritis where they're going, if you have a type of arthritis where it looks like, say, rheumatoid, or it looks like psoriatic, but it doesn't operate the way you would expect it to if you have that kind of arthritis, that perhaps you should be considering oxalate as an underpinning to that condition. And as somebody who is diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in her 20s, by the way, don't have it, was told recently, oh, you must have been misdiagnosed. Yeah. Anyway, getting your diet right matters. I would have to argue with somebody who thinks that oxalate doesn't matter just because you don't have kidney stones. I never had a kidney stone in my life. I was sick enough by 48 with my 3-year-old and my 8-year-old, who I was trying to be a decent mother to, that I didn't think I'd live to see them grow up. And I'm 63. I'm not lying. I can get out my birth certificate. I'm back to the idea of replacement parts. Why would I want any kind of bioaccumulating toxin in my replacement parts. If my body's not functioning well, then I'm not going to do as well. And actually, I'm also reminded of the fact that one of the places where oxalate can bioaccumulate is the bones. And one of the worst things that can happen to you as you become elderly is things like falls and broken hips, and how people may not recover well after that kind of an injury. And it does have me wondering a little bit about, does that mean there's something going on with oxalate as it bioaccumulates in the bones that maybe is setting us up for this really poor recovery as well? So there's just so many things with oxalate. I would ask people to just entertain some questions, because I'm also not saying that oxalate's the be all and end all or the only thing that can causing somebody a problem. I don't think that at all. And at the same time, I just want people to keep an open mind that if we know from research that it's got some of these things, triggers the inflammasome, messes with the mitochondria, can be bioaccumulating in places like bones and other joints. And actually, it's implicated in a bunch of things, including it can be involved in gallstones and it can be in arterial plaque. So there's lots of places where oxalate can be doing things. Maybe we should just take more of a cost benefit analysis kind of look at the foods that we're eating and say nutrient dense, low in toxins. And if I'm in that ballpark, then I'm okay. But if I'm trying to do these extra healthy things that are just oxalate bombs, then perhaps I should be thinking about that.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about that. We should think about all of our food in that way, like you explained. So I love that. And maybe like a square of chocolate has some oxalate. Maybe that's worth it. But your spinach salad or the spinach smoothie, it's gross anyway. Just get it out.
Exactly. It doesn't even taste good. So why are people
exactly doing it? Easy. Okay, so we've mentioned chelation. We've mentioned chelation in some of our other episodes. But can we talk about what that process is like and what is it about oxalate that does that?
Yeah, okay. It's pretty straightforward with oxalate. It's a double negative anion. No test at the end of this discussion. That just basically means in your body, it's operating like an ion and it has two negative charges on it. From a chemistry standpoint, that double negative anion is looking for positive charges to balance itself out. As far as I know, most mineral chelators that we would use in the area of heavy metals or things like that are all negatively charged. So what oxalate's looking to do is find what I like to call its preferred dance partners. Those would be ideally double positive minerals that it combined with. And that has the list of suspects that you don't really want to lose: calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, copper. There's a lot of them that would be double positive. But it can also take two dance partners if they have a single positive. So it can even affect electrolytes like sodium and potassium and take those out of the body. And so once oxalate as this anion is available in the bloodstream and it runs into a mineral, it's likely to chelate it, which is bind to it. And then when the kidneys sweep it out of the bloodstream, the mineral is going to go with it. The whole complex goes as a unit. This can be an advantage when we have mineral chelation tools where we know exactly what their preferred targets are. And maybe we have issues like heavy metals. So you're trying to get rid of mercury or trying to get rid of, other heavy metals. But with oxalate, it's very indiscriminate. And in fact, most mineral chelators are very indiscriminate. So they will be cheerfully taking any of the available minerals that you have. So I remember once doing mineral chelation for mercury and also having to take enough minerals of other kinds, like a multi-mineral formula, so that I wasn't depleting what I needed while I was getting rid of other heavy metals. So as a chelator, the thing is, it's not discriminating. It's going to take whatever minerals it can bump into. the more toxic it is, the more insoluble it is kind of in general, oxalate. So it's harder for your kidneys to handle if you've got calcium oxalate, for instance, and that can result in kidney stones. But anytime it binds with something where you get a highly insoluble result, that's more toxic and more difficult for the kidneys to handle. And because the kidneys are doing the lion's share of the work because they're scraping out of the bloodstream, we tend to have more likelihood that the kidneys might be experiencing oxidative stress, might be having other kinds of problems from dealing with oxalate. So the big thing there, though, is that people are eating things that look like they're really high in minerals. Spinach is a great example, where they're really not getting the benefit of those minerals because oxalate's bound to them, and that's not a form that's bioavailable to us. So great research done, I think in 1939. I can get you the link for it if you want it for the show notes, where they took lab rats and they gave them the same diet, with the only exception being one set of lab rats got spinach for their calcium, because spinach is actually pretty high in calcium as well. And one set of lab rats got turnip for their calcium. They bred them through 2 generations. Everything fine with your turnip greens and the lab rats that were given that. The lab rats that got spinach, in some cases, were not able to breed. Bones did not mineralize properly. The few females that did manage to have babies, they in fact ate their babies because they were so depleted in what their bodies needed. So sometimes animals will resort to that kind of behavior when they are starving. So even though they were getting this spinach for their calcium, they were reacting like animals that were not getting enough of what they needed. So when you're talking straight ahead, sometimes they couldn't reproduce, sometimes they were consuming their own young, and universally their bones weren't mineralizing well. That doesn't add up like a nice thing. But that's oxalate being able to hang on to those minerals, and you're not getting access to them.
Wow. Okay, that was super well explained. Chemistry is not my strong suit, and I was able to follow along with all of that. So nice job. So, okay, so in that context, you kind of answered a lot of my next question, but let's say you just convinced me there's minerals in spinach, whether they're bioavailable or not. That sounds good to me. I see Popeye and he's got big biceps and I want big biceps. So I'm going to end this conversation, go have a huge spinach salad or whatever. Take us through that trip through the body, how it ends up in certain places. Once it gets in your mouth, what's the mechanical damage that maybe happens? How does it pass through? And then begin that process. And then you said it can go anywhere indiscriminately. Where are the most likely tissues that it goes to? And we've talked a lot about this in the past, and I know you've learned more about this stuff more recently too. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay. So you start eating your spinach salad. The first thing you might notice when you're chewing it is that it's got a slightly gritty texture. There's no mistaking what that is. Those are insoluble oxalate crystals. So interestingly enough, spinach is pretty good at defending itself from insects. And one of its best defenses is the mechanical action of crystalline oxalate, and the mouth of the insect is likely to get chewed up by the leaf, which is why when you grow spinach, it doesn't get bothered. When you grow rhubarb, it doesn't really get bothered. Like, these are things where there's so much oxalate in there, no insect, which is largely the biggest things that predate on plants are insects. And yeah, they don't tend to go there. So as you're chewing, one of the things you're doing is liberating any ionic oxalate. So that's the stuff that doesn't already have a mineral and is going to go look for one. That's going to begin right in the mouth where you have the saliva and so on to help begin the digestion process. As you're swallowing your mouthful of spinach, you've chewed it up, you've started to release whatever nutrients are available, but you've also started to release these microcrystals. And I think one of the things that can begin even as early as the mouth can be irritation from those microcrystals. So if you think about how your skin would react to fine sandpaper, even if it's the finest sandpaper, but just kind of repeatedly rubbing on it, a lot of my clients, ground zero for dietary exposure to oxalate is the mouth all the way through the digestive tract. So Some people will have actual pain, potentially IBS kinds of things going on in the gut. Some people will have esophageal issues. So I've had clients where they had pain and irritation from the mouth through the esophagus. Some people will experience tonsil stones. So, your glands along the way can sometimes be exposed to oxalate, can bioaccumulate. Once you get to the stomach, the stomach can do its basic things. It's relatively well protected between mucosal layer and stomach acid and things like that. I have probably a higher than normal number of people who would have some level of stomach issue, but part of that would be related to oxalate as it affects some of the organs of digestion. So oxalate gets trafficked into the cells based on what the cell transporters can move. There are probably three main nutrients where the cell transporters will move that nutrient, but will also move oxalate. One of them is chloride cell transporters. So chloride cell transporters can also move oxalate. That means oxalate will compete for that place in the cell transporter. And some of the places where we use chloride would include producing things like stomach acid. So can the stomach have some issues? Sure can. And you can also have some glandular issues. So if you're trafficking things like chloride into the thyroid, then an awful lot of people, one of the first things that was a shot over the bow for oxalate is that their thyroid isn't very happy. And of course, the thyroid's also close by the throat, and you've been swallowing oxalate. So it's a transport thing, but once it's in there, you can be doing all kinds of stuff. The other way that oxalate gets transported into cells, though, can be on bicarbonate transporters. So when it comes to digestion, if we're still trying to follow through, trying not to bounce around too much, if we're still trying to follow the food through, as it leaves the stomach, the pancreas should release digestive enzymes. A big part of what the pancreas is releasing is also bicarbonate to bring up the pH of the food as it leaves the stomach. Because the pancreas is one of the biggest consumers of bicarbonate, but bicarbonate transporters can move oxalate. The pancreas can be affected, and sometimes we're not releasing enough digestive enzymes. So that can mean that food at not the right pH level for the intestines is hitting the intestines. So that's inflammatory as well. And you still have your microcrystals moving along with it. So that's coming into the intestines. As you get past the pancreas, you have the bile duct, where the liver will release bile into the gallbladder. Actually, if you've still got a gallbladder, I don't have one. So I was thinking of the liver, but the gallbladder will be releasing bile, and the liver produces the bile. And unfortunately, sulfate transporters can also have oxalate competing for uptake. So you may actually be releasing more oxalate into the gut via the bile, and you also may not have enough bile because you've got this oxalate, which has been taken up by the liver instead of the sulfate that it needs. So we've only just entered the top of the intestines. We've had more oxalate added, potentially not enough bile, potentially not enough digestive enzymes, and not the right pH level. And then that stuff's going to hit the digestive tract. So now again, we're inside this tube and we've got this light sandpapering thing going on. But oxalate's also going to, I'm going to argue, change some of that microbiome, because oxalate is a kind of fuel. There are certain organisms in the gut that will use oxalate as fuel. They will use it as food. So they will degrade it in their process of metabolizing it. The challenge there is, are those species that you really want to encourage? In some cases, they're not the ones we want, but we are shifting this balance with what we're doing in terms of the food that arrives there, right? A lot of people who deal with oxalate will find over time that they have some level of motility issue. The gut's being irritated physically as well as potentially biochemically with all the things that are going on. So you could get constipation, diarrhea, both. People might have an IBS diagnosis or not, but lots of people have struggles with whether or not they're getting proper motility in the gut. But if the gut's constantly low grade inflamed, of course it's not going to work the way it's supposed to. And as the stool is exiting the body, I do find that there's a lot more people who, if they've got some kind of motility problem, may also have irritation as they're trying to get rid of what's in the gut. And so that can mean hemorrhoids, but it can also mean just straight ahead irritation. You still have that sandpaper leaving the body. So it's really not pleasant for the digestive tract. That's really ground zero for where oxalate does its first kinds of damage. But any of it that's passively absorbed out of the gut, and of course, as the gut gets more inflamed, it might get more leaky. So then you might get more of it passively absorbed out of the gut. Then you have more of it in the bloodstream. And from there, again, any tissues where they've got chloride cell transporters, sulfate cell transporters, or bicarbonate cell transporters may be moving this oxalate into those tissues. And so that gives lots of targets, unfortunately. But yeah, big consumer of bicarbonate, your pancreas. Big consumer of sulfate, your liver, to some degree, your kidneys. Big consumer of chloride, that can be very much system-wide. And then it depends to some degree on your genetics and things where I don't have the kind of depth where I'd want to talk about them, but we do know that certain kinds of genetics might predispose you to cell transporters, which may be more likely to move oxalate as opposed to less likely to move oxalate. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's
For sure.
just all kinds of stuff going on there. Anyway.
Not great. It's not great. Okay, so you mentioned the spinach and that grittiness, and that's the one way I can get somebody to at least understand what oxalate is. I'll have my clients just do a little experiment in your brain, chew a piece of spinach, that mouthfeel that you get. Those are the crystals. And I'll show them like on my phone, like these are what these crystals look like. And they look terrifying. Like it looks like shards of glass or whatever. And it's so interesting to try to explain, like, at least these are the ones that are going to pass through. They're going to sandpaper everything, and that's not great. But at least they leave. The other kind, the ionic kind, the smaller version that you said passively enters into the blood, that doesn't necessarily leave so early. And we do have some detoxification possibility, but it's limited. And this is why the accumulation is such a big problem, correct?
Well, and the thing is, you can't detox it the way you can some other things. So let's compare it to something like salicylate, which in my world also has a lot of press these days. Salicylate, the liver can take it, manipulate it, make it easier for us to get rid of it, and then we excrete it more freely. With oxalate, what we do to get rid of it is secrete it. We cannot make it less toxic. Our bodies don't have the metabolic pathways to manipulate it. So once ionic oxalate's in there, it's in there until we can secrete it out. And so the kidneys are getting rid of it by secretion. We can actually secrete it back into the gut. So if the gut didn't have enough problems to start out with oxalate, we can actually double down there. So poor guts. But we also see that there are people who, once they get more oxalate toxic, they're more likely to use other methods of secretion to move it out. So they can be secreting it out through the skin. I have had, interestingly enough, on our support group, the Triangle Oxalates group, we had somebody who had crystals that were exiting through her skin. She managed to get a lab to test it. It was oxalate. And it was moving out through, like you can secrete through the skin, right? We secrete oils to our skin. Secretion's taking place there. She was moving out oxalate that way. You can also move it out through mucous membranes. You have mucous membranes in the sinuses. You have mucous membranes in the lungs. When people have cystic fibrosis, interestingly enough, they often have more oxalate issues. So there's something about some of the cell transporters that have to do with that cystic fibrosis family of cell transporters, where that can be an indicator to you that you could be predisposed to more issues with oxalate. But my son is a great example of somebody who, mostly when I know he's had too much oxalate, it's because he starts to get stuffy and he starts to wheeze. He sounds like he has asthma, and it's really related to oxalate with him. When we got him off oxalate when he was a kid, he went from taking antihistamines like a food group to a perfectly normal kid who had no issues like that. So you see things like that. And for some people, it'll turn up as rashes. Again, it's the skin, but we're not maybe getting like a visible, obvious crystal. That would be somebody who's got a more extreme issue. But in my daughter's case, what got her diagnosed with an oxalate issue was these rashes, and with a functional medical naturopathic doctor, so a functional med ND, who happened to know about oxalate and knew what he was looking at. And with her, it was rashes. And so we can be moving it out in any of the ways that we secrete. So while the kidneys may do the lion's share of the work, you've got these other things which could be indicators.
Yeah. And I've heard also like burping, belching, maybe, things like your breathing. We talked about lungs last time where it can accumulate. So you can be breathing it out as well. Do I understand that correctly?
You're not so much breathing it out as it may be moving out through the secretions of the lungs. So if you're coughing more, if you have more phlegm, or if you're getting more irritation here, such that you're getting wheezing, that could be your body's trying to get rid of this oxalate.
Okay.
And the burping and belching is, well, you do have, essentially a mucus layer in the stomach. So honestly, I need to do t-shirts that say, when in doubt, blame oxalate. But that's a danger too. Like, while these things can be places where you'd see oxalate, I wouldn't want people to think, well, she just thinks everything's oxalate. It's an easy trap to fall into, only because there's stuff to indicate that oxalate can end up in all kinds of places. But what I would say is worthwhile is to at least entertain. If you've got something chronically wrong with a system and you're doing everything right, but you're not getting better, maybe there's something that's a confounding factor underneath there. And if it's something that's a basic in your diet, like you're consuming a lot of oxalate, let's just entertain the idea. What if it is? And then, perform an experiment. Do your N=1 situation where you take your oxalate down and see what happens, right? But yeah, unfortunately, I've seen all kinds of symptoms in all kinds of parts of the body. And one of the things that really disturbed me the most was eyes. And there is research on people who have oxalosis and the kinds of impacts to eyes. And again, eyes secrete because they secrete tears.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Okay. It's crazy. There's two other places in the body I wanted to talk to you about. The first is the brain. Do we know what's going on in the brain, and can that affect psychological things like mood, anxiety, depression? Again, I agree with you. It feels like we're insane for talking about all these things.
Yeah. I've developed a kind of paranoia, and it's related to oxalate. Yeah. The thing about oxalate in the brain is that we do know that oxalate can act as a neurotoxin. However, what I'd say to you is I don't think what's happening in the brain may be oxalate on its own. So there is a relationship between the kind of irritation that oxalate creates in the body and the immune system. Because if you drive this inflammation, then the immune system kind of gets talking and gets revved up and starts to do more things. So what's very intriguing to me is that an awful lot of people who have oxalate issues will have anxiousness, but you see the same kind of high anxiousness in people who are dealing with things like mast cell activation, or I think they call it cell danger response. And there's a bunch of other things where we're really talking about the body being hypervigilant and the immune system turned on to and revving too high. And I think that's one of the places where you may have oxalate functioning on an intermediary, knocking it over, and that's where you're getting the symptom. So, and for me, this is one where I'm kind of working with the following hypothesis. So I don't have what I would consider good enough understanding from what I've read in the research literature to have a really firm sort of stand on this, but I'm working with this hypothesis, which is your immune system kind of gets revved up because you've got oxalate constantly driving a background of inflammation, irritating mast cells, driving the inflammasome, setting up inflammation so it just keeps going like a hamster on a wheel, right? So then the immune system perhaps becomes more and more vigilant, right? Because this is the immune system's reason for existence, is inflammation. It's supposed to intervene there. Why? Inflammation either means we got an infection, we got a bug of some kind, right? That's the immune system's business. Or we have an injury, and that's the immune system's business because we're trying to generate inflammation in a productive way so that injuries heal. what if we've got all this talk from the immune system to the nervous system, right? But it's just this constantly escalating conversation. For me, what I found over time is as I got oxalate out, I was not the slightly high strung, irritable, and much more anxious human being that I'd always known myself to be. It turned out that some of it had been physiological. And that was really intriguing to me, that by changing my diet, somehow I'd done enough change in the physiology. But the reason I think the immune system is a big mediator on this one is that there was a point in time where I'd been on a low oxalate diet for, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years, whatever it was. And then we had an extremely high stress year here. And I tipped myself over into what one practitioner told me she thought was mast cell activation. And there wasn't any oxalate for me to be dealing with at that point. But I did find that much like when I'd been dealing with oxalate, my anxiousness came up. Very similar looking, very similar kind of symptomology from that standpoint in terms of mood and irritability and how to handle it. So it's very much based right now on my personal experience with some of this complexity as well. But I'm really wondering if some of the mood dysregulation is really more mediated through the immune system than the nervous system directly, and that it's oxalate hits the immune system, then the immune system is affecting the brain.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And that answer might also be the same answer for the next question I had for you, which was around cancer, which we know is related to inflammation. And in particular, I want to say you mentioned breast cancer in one of our other interviews. But what do we know about oxalate and cancer?
We don't know a lot about oxalate and other cancers. So I haven't seen much that would say to me, oh, we know it's related to, let's say, colon cancer or something else where we're dealing with these ground zero locations for oxalate from our diet to be affecting us. But in the area of breast cancer, they actually did research again with lab rats, these poor rats. I'm not trained with these guys for anything. And what they did was they injected them with oxalate. And the researchers for this particular study came out very strongly and said that oxalate's a breast cancer trigger. Now, that's serious language in the research world. They're not talking associated. They're not using any of these softer kinds of words. They actually said it induced breast cancer.
Wow.
And that one really concerns me. That's one where I try to get more people aware of it. I did write an article which went up on a website called Hormones Matter, which is about oxalate and breast cancer, because what we know, in addition to sort of the cell transporters that will move oxalate, is that hormones affect the trafficking of oxalate. And in my female clients, I can see really clear associations between, for instance, where they are in their menstrual cycle and when oxalate starts to move. And for a lot of these women, it'll line up with that PMS time period. So as these hormones are dropping, as you come into the menstrual cycle, that's when oxalate starts to move. And so I worry a little bit about, I'm going to say, hormonally sensitive tissues, especially as related to the expression of our sex hormones and where oxalate moves. And so as estrogen is dropping, what if then the breasts are more vulnerable to oxalate? What if that's part of the reason why we have this epidemic of breast cancer? And among women who are getting over 40 and over 50, I see more and more of them who have conditions like interstitial cystitis, which is bladder related, but also something called vulvodynia, which is related to like basically the private parts in general, but can really impact them in terms of their sexual functioning. And this is not fun stuff. Like nobody wants to go down these roads. But as hormones drop, it's possible that oxalate that's been stored in those tissues starts to be able to do things it couldn't do when you had more estrogen on board. So these are things where I think we definitely need more research. The fact that we know at all that hormones affect how oxalate gets trafficked was at least what gave me the heads up to sort of watch for patterns. And I now wonder a lot about PMS. I became my husband's Zen wife when I got low enough in oxalate. I didn't have this big PMS sort of flare up with my mood like so easily set off and stuff. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting, because we think these things are quote unquote normal. What if they're not?
Yeah. Very well explained again. Thank you so much for going there. I also wanted to maybe elaborate a little bit more on a few of the other things that you mentioned. It seems like they're all friends. Maybe they're all like homies in the same gang or something, like the histamines and the salicylates. Are these friends of oxalate? Like, what are these guys doing together?
I think they hang out together. There's a kid's book, Lions, Tigers, Bears, Oh My. And I remember reading it to my kids when they were little. So now I've rewritten that as oxalate, histamines, and salicylates. Oh my.
Oh my.
Oh my. Anyway, it is a bit like a three-ring circus. We have this business of oxalate setting up the inflammasome, driving inflammation, irritating the mast cells. That's where histamine comes in, because the mast cells have lots of things that they can release, but one of the things they release is histamine. And it does seem like we can get at least transitory symptoms which look like histamine or look like allergies, like rashes, like hives, like wheezing with my son. And in fact, some of the insomnia that people get may even be related to histamine. So here's an interesting little factoid for you. Turns out that the American government at one point did experiments using histamine to keep soldiers awake. How your sleep cycle looks like this. Your histamine level in the brain should be low. About 4 o'clock, when the cortisol is being released by your adrenals to wake your body up, your brain's releasing histamine to wake your brain up. And it should stay up and level for you to stay awake. As it drops, that's the cue to the brain to sleep. And then it needs to stay down for the brain to stay asleep. So this weird insomnia that people get, where they either can't get into sleep or can't stay in sleep, and they tend to pop up in sort of the time frame of maybe 2 to 4 in the morning. That's starting to look a lot like their histamine cycles being messed with to me. So there's things like that where histamines maybe can work for some of your symptoms too. Like you're having this wheezing and you take antihistamine and you feel better and you're doing better. So I think oxalate, as I said, uses mast cells, and by default histamine then is another one of the things that it's kind of the root cause for, if we want to use that language. With salicylate, it's slightly different because that's the liver, and the liver can be taking up salicylate instead of sulfate. So then detox isn't working as well. And as we're not detoxing as well, then salicylate is staying in the body longer, and it's around long enough to irritate things. And if it's sitting in the bloodstream for long enough and present, then eventually this kind of salicylate intolerance is basically we can't clear that stuff fast enough. We're not detoxing it well. I'm suspicious that's oxalate being taken up by the liver. Then the liver can't do all of its normal work. So its bandwidth is doing this. And then we end up with the salicylate issue. And then we round out the three-ring circus with research which showed that salicylate can act as a mast cell irritant. So we go right around in a circle. It can like do one to the next, and just, it's like dominoes. We hit one and you might hit all three of them with the one hit.
Yeah, you will not convince me to not be carnivore after conversations like this. Let's just avoid the whole kit and caboodle and just focus on animal foods. Okay, so we've talked in the past about your dirty dozen, which I think is brilliant. You've mentioned also that it seems like every year trends are kind of coming up and down, and that you may or may not be updating your kind of list. And it's been about over a year that we've had you back on. And so what are some of the key players? We don't have to go into all 12 if you don't want, but what are some of the really key things? And is anything like traded around?
Yeah, there has been some things that trade around. So there's basics for me that'll never change. The nuts, mostly things like almond and cashew are just so high. Beets are really high, unfortunately, too. Rhubarb. It's hard to knock rhubarb out of its spot because it's really big. And spinach is just so popular and remains so. Dark chocolate, if you're having more than a little square, it's not a good thing. But what's now got my attention are chaga mushroom, which is just so high in oxalate, it's shocking. So I think I mentioned to you 20,000 milligrams per 100 milligrams or 100 grams serving. So 100 grams is about 3.5 ounces of chaga mushroom. You could be getting 20,000 milligrams of oxalate. That's 1/5 of that is essentially oxalate. And at that level, it should not be considered a food. Like, I need to probably see if we can get some chaga extract tested to see if that brings the oxalate down enough for maybe it to be okay. But honestly, at first blush, I'd say just don't touch it. The
Yeah.
other
So
one, which
200,000, real quick for reference, the low oxalate diet is 50 milligrams a day. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay,
So if
so
you were getting
20,000.
20,000, yeah, it's an
Wow.
insane amount. It's just an insane amount. And I always thought rhubarb was the worst thing, and it's only 750 milligrams an hour.
That's great.
It's like nothing compared. Yeah. The other one I really have decided is evil is chia. The world is just totally enamored by chia seeds now. And it seems like everybody is using these things. The new thing is chia pudding, where you're actually using this stuff instead of dairy in order to make a pudding. And the challenge with chia, it's not as bad as chaga, but let's just say that 1 ounce of your standard chia seeds is 200 milligrams of oxalate. So you really don't want to be eating this stuff, right? The other one that recently got my attention, and we don't eat a lot of Mexican or Latin American kind of cuisine, but plantain. Plantain's kind of big in some of those dishes. And the problem with plantain, again, is how much oxalate you get in what's a relatively small serving of food. So about 50 grams of plantain, you're getting about 35 milligrams of oxalate. But the bigger thing is things like plantain chips, because that's, kind of fun. 1 ounce of plantain chips, 40 milligrams. So that's your day's consumption. And if you're using plantain flour, like 90 milligrams in about a half a cup. So for some of these foods, it's not the amount in a single serving, it's having lots of it repeatedly. So that would be like almonds, where 1 ounce of them is about 300 milligrams of oxalate. And who eats 1 ounce of nuts?
Nobody.
Right? So, and cashews are up there too, 250 or so in 1 ounce. And we don't eat 1 ounce. Because they're so palatable. Right.
Yeah.
So those would be new ones on my radar. And the other ones are that I don't think people pay enough attention to are things that are spices and herbs that we think are very healthy. So turmeric's a bad one. And lots of people love turmeric and they want to put it in everything. Right? Like 1 teaspoon of turmeric is about 70 milligrams of oxalate. And then there's things that we think are really good for us, like milk thistle. That's a great example. Milk thistle is an herb, right? If you use milk thistle extract, you're fine. But if you have straight ahead milk thistle, like a capsule can be like 30 or 40 milligrams. And you're not, again, with stuff like that, you're not taking 1 capsule. What we're not doing is sort of disentangling the toxin from the therapeutic benefit of one kind or another. So with things like turmeric, if you use curcumin powder instead of ground turmeric, you're getting a tiny fraction of the oxalate. So 1 teaspoon of turmeric will be 70 milligrams of oxalate, give or take. And 1 teaspoon of curcumin powder will be 1 milligram of oxalate. So they're not, it's orders of magnitude different often with things like extracts. So that can give us some benefits and avoid the original food and the problem of the higher oxalate. And with many of these things, we have ways where you can substitute. So don't eat plantain, eat banana. It's way lower than plantain. Don't eat spinach, eat arugula. Again, orders of magnitude different. Don't eat Swiss chard, same deal. Maybe you want Dino kale if you want something that's a more similar green. People don't realize how simple it can be to sort of get away from some of these really, I'm going to say, bad actors in terms of diet and move towards something where what they've really got is a very comparable food with very comparable nutrients without the anti-nutrient load, without that toxic load of oxalate or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you gave us on one of our episodes a link for a website or a company that does extracts for all of those spices. We may have even gotten a discount code from you. So I'll be sure to link that in the description as well. You reminded me of something I was going to ask you anyway. Are we getting any better at actually truly knowing how much oxalate is in certain foods? I know that's been a huge problem, and it's been very difficult. I know like Sally Norton in particular wrote Toxic Superfoods last year, and it was really vexing for her to try to figure out through the research, like, how close are we on some of these, knowing exactly how much is in there?
I think we're pretty close with some foods, but honestly, with many foods, we do not have enough data points for anything like an average. So we're kind of misled, if you will, by things like calories. Like there's all kinds of websites online where they have the calories for a particular food. And what we don't realize is there might be hundreds or more than hundreds of tests of those foods in the background that resulted in the value that you see, and that it's an average. The food in front of you may not be exactly what you're seeing online, but we've done enough testing, we've got a solid average. And so there's not maybe the same kind of opportunity for big errors. But with oxalate, if we're lucky, if we've got something that looks like a scatter plot, in most cases, we've got one or two values. And if one of the values is really high and one of the values is really low, anybody's guess, right? So through the Triangle Oxalates group, we are going to take a focus on some of these foods where we have data which doesn't line up nicely, or we've got too big a scatter between maybe 2 or 3 or 4 points of data, so that we can try and see, do we have something where we know we're closer to this data point or that data point, so that we can kind of make some assumptions. But honestly, it's really hard because things like tomatoes. At one point, the Vulvar Pain Foundation, which actually does oxalate testing as well, did a whole project just on different varieties of tomatoes. Every tomato was different. And so the challenge there is we can't do this diet perfectly, unless you're carnivore, in which case it's pretty darn close to perfect. But otherwise, you're not going to know exactly what your oxalate intake is. What you want to do is bias in a direction. And so I'll be doing more on my own, but also with my friends and colleagues in the Wizards of Ox.
So good.
We are a group of 4 women, and we've all been involved with oxalate for at least 15 years. I'm the baby in the group, so with me, it's 15. The rest of them have, 16, 18, 20 years. So between us, we've got more than 70 years of oxalate experience between all of us. And as the Wizards of Ox, we're going to be talking a bit more about where we've got enough data to bias your diet in particular directions, so that people who want to have kind of a basic shopping list can have a basic shopping list. And what I'd say is that for everybody, nutrient-dense, low toxin is going to take you deeper into consuming some animal products. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because there's research coming out on how much more nutrient bioavailability you have when you eat animal products. And, really, that's what our body's built from. So what we really want to do is try to take ourselves to lower oxalate, nutrient density. And where you're going to include plants, please include the ones that are not going to boot your butt around the block, right? Let's do the ones that are low in bad things so that you can eat well. And most people have a standard shopping list. So the idea is really, if you're going to have a standard shopping list, if you're going to eat and bias your diet in a particular direction, do these foods, because we have solid enough data to say these are going to be pretty safe from an oxalate standpoint. You're getting some nutrients here. For those who want to be happy omnivores, we're covering all the categories, that kind of thing.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, that was a great response. So we're going to have a listener out there. Maybe this is the first time they've heard about oxalates, and they're thinking, okay, great, I can do this. I'm going to take out all these foods. I'm never going to eat oxalate again. You're making a little bit of a grimace. Can you explain why that wouldn't be the best idea, and why it would be a very good idea to hire somebody like you to help coach them through that process?
Yeah, one way or the other, what they want to have is a bit of context before they do this, right? So, okay, you've heard this interview, maybe you've listened to the other ones we've done, and you're thinking that oxalate could be your thing. What you really want to do is start out by saying, I'm going to follow my own diet for a little while. I'm going to track things a little bit. It doesn't have to be in a lot of detail, but I'm going to start to understand where the oxalate is in my diet. first. And maybe I'm going to join one of the support groups, find out where the food lists are out there, and kind of at least make a stab at where I am. Some foods may be harder to make a stab at as others, but again, we're back to you're not going to do this perfectly. For most people, if they're having problems with brain fog and, mood dysregulation and anxiousness, but they're also very fatigued and they don't want to take on a really complex problem, because this is your Rubik's Cube of nutrition, then definitely get somebody to help you, because you want to come down slowly. I like a lot of the material in Sally Norton's book. She's done a great job of trying to lay things out. But for some people, dropping a lot of oxalate quickly, and particularly if they're one of these people, they're starting off their day with, a green smoothie that's based on almond butter and chocolate and spinach. And then they go to a glass of celery juice. And then at lunchtime, they're having Swiss chard and they're doing a curry and it's full of turmeric. Like if they're eating a couple thousand milligrams of oxalate a day, which really unfortunately is not that hard in today's world, especially if they're focusing on these superfoods, then you really need to have a plan for how you're bringing that down. If you drop really quickly, you can have really intensive mobilization of oxalate. And that's where oxalate gets the second kick at the can. So it was toxic on the way in, but if it was on the way in when you were pretty healthy still, kind of handling your life well, blah, blah, blah. But now you're realizing, well, my health has just still been decaying, right? And now you're trying to get it out. What we want to do is protect your body's resilience, protect your ability to handle a day, and not have you mobilize it too quickly. And this is a similar problem with heavy metals. You don't want to move heavy metals out of your body too fast. There's a lot of research which says we do this in a carefully measured kind of way. We don't overdo chelators, blah, 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 because heavy metals get another kick at the can as they leave your body. So it was toxic on the way in, it's toxic on the way out, and you want to preserve your body's ability to handle a day for you. And you also want to make sure that you have, I'm going to say, nutrients on board to do the work that oxalate's going to generate. It is a multi-phased kind of thing. If you're relatively healthy, if you have a history of taking supplements already, and if you feel like you're up to the challenge, I was not a nutritionist when I started this, and we made some notable mistakes. There were some unpleasant things that happened, just so people know, but we did make it through in the end. I did land in the ER though once. And so it isn't necessarily a comfortable process. So having somebody who's been down the road ahead of you can be really helpful, in the sense of you have somebody to reach out to and say, this is going on. What do I do?
Yeah.
Or I'm feeling really wretched. Where's our next stop on whatever? Or how do I handle if I've got this kind of symptom? That may be something where somebody else who's knowledgeable can help you out with that. So it's a little bit complicated, but minerals first are a gentle way to handle things, because minerals are going to be impacted by oxalate. So it's a simple thing. Most people can handle taking a multi-mineral, maybe getting some extra magnesium, doing those kinds of things. Then you would keep making sure that your diet's nutrient dense, and maybe you move to some really gentle things like certain amino acids to support. Taurine can help your body to make bile, as an example. Do some simple, easy things. Take some stuff that helps to feed the mitochondria and support them. CoQ10 is a nice little add there. D-ribose is a kind of sugar that's good for the mitochondria. And then you might go, okay, now I might be ready for some other big vitamins, because what people will do is like go straight for like a big high dose B complex and knock themselves on their butts. And so there is good reason to get some help, but I often have people who will consult with me for maybe 3 or 4 appointments, and then they get the wind under their wings and off they go. So it doesn't have to be forever, but there can be good reasons to get somebody to hold your hand a little bit first.
I think that would be very helpful. And speaking of your clients, I'm assuming most of them only came to you because of a plant-heavy, vegan, vegetarian based. It's not necessarily people that were eating a standard American diet, correct? Like it is people that really were more of the vegetables. So you might be screwed up metabolically by eating standard American, but one good thing is you probably aren't poisoned with oxalate.
Well, yes and no, because potatoes are big in the
Potatoes,
standard.
yeah.
So most of my clients truly were trying to eat healthier and actually started to feel worse. And that's kind of where they, one way or another, heard about oxalate and ended up on my doorstep. But it's surprising how much you can take in on a paleo diet, on specific carbohydrate, on a bunch of these things where they're focusing on nuts and gluten-free alternatives, or they're focusing on greens. And so you really don't have to have been taking in chaga mushroom every day in order to end up in a bit of a pickle.
That's crazy. I had no idea about that one. That was a total surprise to me. Crazy. Is there anything we're missing? Is there anything you'd like to talk about as far as oxalate that we kind of cruise by? Anything you want to emphasize, or something we completely missed?
Gosh, the heads up on chaga with all the things that I've been seeing online is really one of those ones where I definitely wanted to make sure that we covered that today. We did talk through most of the big things, that you can't do it perfectly. It's pattern over precision on this thing. It's biasing your diet. It's not perfection. The last thing I will say, if you're on a heavily plant-based diet and you want to go straight to carnivore, the big thing there is I am very suspicious that what the carnivore world calls adaptation actually has a lot to do with oxalate. And so that is one of the most extreme drops in oxalate you can take, is going from any kind of diet to a carnivore diet. And so if any of your listeners have done that, they've gone straight to a carnivore diet and they're really struggling and they're not feeling better, those are people who I would really like to help, because I think there's lots of benefits to a carnivore diet. But I converted after being low oxalate for 7, 8, 9 years. And so I didn't have to deal with the intensive oxalate dumping or some of the slow ramp up that you should really do. Like maybe you're mostly carnivore, but you keep some of these oxalate heavy hitters in your diet and slowly then claw those out, maybe work with them a little bit going up and down so that you keep your body kind of paying attention. As soon as your body thinks it's got a homeostasis, that's when, if you've come down to carnivore and you've just stayed at carnivore, that's when you can get like this huge movement of oxalate, especially if you were really high at various points in time. Like if anybody who's ever been a vegan or a vegetarian and wants to go to carnivore, oh, please call me first. Please, please. Let me help you do that in a way so that you're not going to think you just have a lemon for a body. I thought I had a lemon for a body. I am 63 and I got guns.
The gun show. I'm
jealous. I love that, right? I love that.
That's so cool. Monique, we've now been able to have 4 totally unique, amazing episodes talking really deep, over an hour every time, about this stuff. I love your passion and your drive to continue to educate yourself and learn more about this. You come to the table with new information all the time. I'm very much looking forward to having you back on. Maybe next year we can talk about what else you've learned. It's such an important topic. And again, I feel insane all the time talking about it. I know you get a little bit of that too, but your work is really amazing. And you're able to talk about this in a way that's really simple and explain things really, really well. So I really appreciate that. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
I'd be happy to have conversations with people on Twitter. I do have a social media guy who does some of my posts, but I'm live on Twitter. I actually type my own responses. So if people actually, want to interact a little bit, I can do that. I do still volunteer some of my time with the Trying Low Oxalates support groups. And there's one on Groups.io. And there's one on Facebook. So I am still there. I do try to go in and answer a question or two at least 3 to 5 days a week on the Trying Low Oxalates groups. So still volunteering there. I have social media on Instagram, and I also have a page on Facebook under Low Ox Coach. And so people can get little bite-sized pieces of information if they're interested there. I have a YouTube channel now. I'm starting to feel like I'm too many places. I have a YouTube channel now under Low Ox Coach. Oh, heaven help me. My social media guy has me on TikTok. I'm just
no way.
I'm on TikTok now.
You are reverse aging. That is evidence that you're reverse aging.
And I actually have a subscription group on Patreon. So for people who want to follow my thinking on topics over time, I do post there with following the research and where I think this is fitting in, set up so that people can, if they're dealing with more complex health issues, they might actually get some support from there.